morning, everyone.
Morning.
Hope everybody had a good New Year's. And welcome to the new year, 2023. That sounds crazy. Especially if somebody born, 1971, start thinking 2020 and 23 and all these just, it sounds wild. But I was going to pick up on I preached last week on the birth of Jesus. And so I said I was going to try to preach on Jesus, the life of Jesus from now until, or last week till the Passover, and about the life of Jesus. And I left off in Luke chapter 2. It's going to be in verse 21. And this week is kind of a weird title because it's named circumcision. But that was part of what I'll go back and read here in a minute. But I'm going to start off there. In Luke chapter 2, verse 21, it says, on the 8th day, when it was time to circumcise him, he was named Jesus. The name he had given by the angel before he had been conceived. When the time of their purification according to the law of Moses had been complete, Joseph and Mary took him to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord, as it was written by the law of the Lord. Every firstborn male is consecrated. I can't read now. I can just gotta get this out of my mouth. Consecrated to the Lord, an offer of sacrifice in keeping with what is said in the law of the Lord. Now, this was also presented back where I'm going to go to next, is in Genesis, to read about circumcisions. In Genesis chapter 17, verse 9. Verse 9 it says, then God said to Abraham, whereas for you must keep the covenant, and your descendants after you for generations to come. This is my covenant with you and your descendants after you, the covenant you are to keep. Every male among you shall be circumcised. You are to undergo circumcision, and it will be a sign of covenant between me and you. For the generations to come, every male among you who is on the 8th day, 8 days old, must be circumcised, including those born in your household or brought with money from a foreigner, those who are not your offsprings, whether born in your household or brought with money, they must be circumcised. My covenant is your flesh, is the everlasting covenant. Any circumcised male who has been circumcised in the flesh will be cut from his people, has thus been broken my covenant. Now, the reason I go back there is because from Abraham to Moses, this was part of the covenant with God, a sign that you were going to raise your child through God. And that's, nowadays you just think most people think it's just a health thing, people, it's healthier, cleaner, whatever. But this was actually a procedure done to show that the faith that you're going to take your child and raise him through God. And that's what Joseph and Mary did with Jesus back in Luke. They went and took him on the 8th day and circumcised him to show that he had a covenant with God. Because even though he was going to be the Son of God, what kind of covenant would it be if he didn't get circumcised? And it's kind of hard to preach a whole sermon on circumcision. I've listened to several messages and read about it and everything, so it's kind of hard to, but that's, I'm just breaking it down because this is, like I say, this is where they follow the covenant with God and Moses and Abraham. And, but one thing I do want to cover is last week, I need to apologize to y'all because I normally don't do things like that, but I not feeling very good. I Googled some stuff and I wrote something down and I didn't research it. And then when I was up here behind the pulpit, I read it and I thought, oh, was that about God? Because I said there was 11 predictions of the coming of Christ, prophecies written in the Old Testament. And one of them I read out of was in Hosea. And like I say, I'm going to switch. I'm still preaching about Jesus, but I'm going to switch it over a little bit so that way, because like I say, it's hard. A whole sermon about circumcision is kind of hard to do. But I said to y'all in Hosea 11, it says when this is supposed to be a prophecy, and I jumped on it because it said it was 800 years old, 800 years before the birth of Christ. So I thought, man, this is pretty good, juicy. And then when I read it, I didn't read it. I just looked at the date. And it says, when Israel was a child, I loved him. And out of Egypt, I called my son. And I read it, and I'm like, oh, man. And I just froze behind here. I'm like, was that about Moses? But then I realized, that it wasn't about Moses. But I'm like, well, Jesus. But what happened is when Jesus was born, Herod sent his wise men to go and check, because he heard there was going to be a birth of a God was giving his son down on earth, a Messiah. And he sent his wise men down there to investigate it, and they did. They came. And what they realized was that Herod said that he was going to, he wanted to offer gifts and his attention and everything to this child. But in fact, that wasn't his intention, and his wise men knew it wasn't his intention. And if you go over here to, Luke, no, not Luke, sorry, Matthew chapter 2. Because that's one of the things that I was learning today, and what my daily, what's it book? Yeah, my daily devotional, I was reading it. Well, I'm just forgetting everything this morning. My daily devotional, it was telling me that, coming to church is not just coming to church to show that you love God, that you honor God, but you're also supposed to learn from God. You're supposed to learn the Bible. You're supposed to learn it. And it's said in there, too, that when sometimes you preach to people, you have to preach milk to them, because people have not learned the Bible yet, and you don't want to try to smother them by by giving them meat, is what they refer to as, because you don't give a baby a steak, without no teeth, you don't give them no steak, you have to give them milk. And that's what it's talking about, people learning their faith. And so that's what, with my devotion, that's the reason I'm trying to tell y'all what I'm learning, because when I say I apologize because I didn't research, because I said it feel good, it looked good, 800 years. But that's what I'm trying to tell y'all is I'm learning the Bible too. I'm learning, I'm reading it, and I'm learning. I want y'all to do the same thing. That's the reason I get up here and explain it to you. So that way, I want y'all to question me. If I say something like that don't sound right to y'all, say, hey, what's so-and-so? So that way I'm just questioning myself all the time. But back to that prophecy, right here in Matthew chapter 2, verse 13, it says, when they had gone to the angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream, get up, he said, take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child and kill him. So he got up, took the child and his mother during the night and left to Egypt, where he stayed until the death of Herod. And so was fulfilled the Lord has said through the prophet, out of Egypt I called my son. When Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious, and he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem in the vicinity who were 2 years old and under, accordance with the time he had learned from the Magi that what was said through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. And see, that's the reason I want y'all and entice y'all to read the Bible, because You go through here and it's like the Old Testament. You know, if you're going to start off new with the Bible, start the New Testament. Read the New Testament. Because you start the Old Testament, you're going to get lost. Trust me. That's what I started doing when I started doing. I thought, I'm going to read it from the first. You know, I'm going to read the Bible from the first to the last. And if you're new at it, that's not a good idea. Your best bet is starting somewhere, you know, Matthew or Luke or somewhere there, and start reading it from there. Because you'll see these prophecies come true. You'll see where, like my Bible, you know, my Bible has where you see the words that has little spots right here, and that's where it's telling you where prophecy goes back to the Old Testament, to show you where the Old Testament and New Testament come together to complete the Bible, to show that every word in this book is true. If you start the Old Testament, start reading this, it's just going to not make sense to you, you know. But then once you start reading where the prophecy came true through Jesus Christ and through the New Testament, that's when it goes back to show the fulfillment of God in this Bible. And that's one of the main things about learning is to admit when you make mistakes, admit when you didn't do something right, like researching it. I know next week I'm going to preach about where Jesus was a 12-year-old. Because there's a lot of gaps in the Bible of Jesus' age. Because right here it just showed, last week it showed where he was born. Then it showed this week where he's been circumcised 8 days later. And then it don't talk about his life until he's 12 years old. And but the thing about it is, you know, really if I get a message across today, it's about showing your dedication to God through your faith, through your children. And so when they see you in a situation where you're doing wrong, you know, because we all do wrong. We all make mistakes. Trust me, I make about 10 of them in the morning, every morning before I even get fully dressed. But the thing about it is, it's showing our faith on how we bounce back from what we've done wrong. If we do wrong, and our kids see us do wrong, and we don't bounce back and do what's right, they're going to think that's the way they're taught. That's what I'm watching my dad. That's what, you know, my dad does. My mom does this. That's what I'm supposed to do. And I see that through my kids. My kids are grown now, and I didn't have that rebound to where I could apologize and do better with them. And so I see them have some traits in me because, you know, I preached one time about my aunt, my great aunt, and my other aunt, where they. This is way back then before we had the cell phones and the internet and all this stuff. But they got mad at each other for whatever reason, I don't know. But they took and they lived across the street from each other. And so they went out and bought 4 by 8 foot pieces of plywood and spray paint so they could spray paint messages to say what they wanted to their neighbor over there across the street. It was just that childish. But I learned, and you know, I'll just give a quick example of that because I learned from it because my family was that way. We held grudges. And my daughter is one of the best ones of holding grudges. She gets mad at somebody, she won't talk to them for years. And where did she get it from? From me. I was the same way. You know? And when you see, you know, a lot of times you see people and it's like, one of my main things I used to be is judgmental people. You know, I see people, I'd be jealous or something, and I would say something, you know, like, oh, you know, he might have that, but he's, you know, something, just try to take away from him, you know. And I see some of my kids that have that same values in them as I bestowed upon them. And I just tell them, oh, you got that from your mama. But no, that's what I'm saying with this right here is with the circumcision is that's what Joseph and Mary did was they took Jesus and they started from day 1 or day 8 and showing where they were going to follow the faith of God by God's law, God's rule, and go through the circumcision. Now, when Jesus came, you know, all that changes. Because the laws changed with Abraham to Moses to Jesus. But nothing has changed differently than what Jesus said, you know. Because the main thing, like I say, if you take anything away from this message this morning, is showing your children how to start. Because at the end, when the Pharisees and the Sadducees asked Jesus, they asked him, they said, what is the most important commandment? And that was, love thy God with all thy heart and all thy soul. And that's the reason I felt, you know, and it's petty. The best reason I felt bad for that last week, because like I say, I felt bad because I didn't research it. And it's like, how can I had plenty of time throughout the week. I had a lot of time out through the week to research that, but I didn't. I chose to do this, do that. Well, actually, my fingers are covered in primer and spray foam, because I've been working on a shower all week, and that stuff just gets all over you. But it's taking time to put the lessons in the Bible. So last week I challenged everybody to pick a church out to go to and try to start out 2023 being faithful at church. Well, I render another challenge today. And I say pick up your Bible. If you don't have a Bible, go buy you one. And if you're like me, I'll read out of the NIV version, because King James it's me being dyslexic, it's kind of hard for me to read with the thus and thou, and, you know, but the NIV is pretty good. But the challenge I make to you is start reading one chapter a day out of the Bible. It takes you about 5-7 minutes at that. And just do that, just try to start applying that to your life. And you'll find out, like I say, it's really a good read, and it's the truth. This Bible has been tested many a time, and there's nothing that they've proven to doubt it.
Amen.
They had 23,000 archaeological digs to disprove this Bible. 23,000. Every time these scientists get together and say, this don't look right in the Bible, we're gonna fraud this. They go dig, and they never found nothing. And what they did found just concurs that this thing is real and true to its word. But they never went back and admitted it. But thank y'all. Love you. Just asking, this is an invitation. If anybody